The world of Pokemon is filled with secrets, hidden details, and stories that many players and fans never fully uncover. While most people know the main characters, the popular battles, and the famous creatures that have carried the franchise for decades, there are countless little facts tucked away in games, anime, and development history that remain strangely obscure. Tonight, we'll drift through 151 of these lesser known details. Each one is a small piece of the larger picture that makes the Pokemon universe so endlessly fascinating. As you listen, allow the flow of knowledge to carry you and slowly relax into calm rest. The design of Pikachu was not originally intended to be the mascot of the franchise. Early drafts leaned toward Clefairy, who was seen as more marketable in Japan. However, as the game spread, Pikachu's bright yellow color and simple design stood out internationally, eventually pushing it into the spotlight as the face of the brand. Had that decision not shifted, the entire image of Pokemon today would be drastically different, and Clefairy would have been on lunchboxes and TV screens instead. In Pokemon Red and Blue, the Safari Zone is home to one of the strangest mechanics in the series. You don't actually battle the wild creatures. Instead, you throw rocks or bait to influence their behavior. The idea came from the challenge of trying to catch animals without fighting them, but many players were left confused as children, unsure why their Ultra Balls were constantly failing. This unusual design choice made the Safari Zone a memorable, if frustrating, experience. In the original anime, Brock was nearly removed after the first season due to concerns about how his appearance might be perceived overseas. Creators even replaced him briefly with Tracy, a character designed to avoid any possible controversy. However, Brock was too popular with fans and eventually returned. This shows how early localization choices could have permanently altered the cast of characters fans grew up with. The ghost in Lavender Town is one of the most eerie parts of the Kanto games. Before acquiring the Sylph Scope, players see a mysterious figure blocking the way. This moment was inspired by Japanese ghost stories and was meant to unsettle rather than frighten. The ghost's reveal as a Marowak adds to its tragedy, grounding a supernatural moment in the grief of a lost Pokemon mother. In Gold and Silver, the original plan was for players to explore multiple regions beyond Johto and Kanto. Developers intended to allow travel across the Pokemon world, but the limitations of the Game Boy cartridge meant this idea had to be scrapped. The fact that even two regions fit into one game was an incredible achievement, pushing the hardware to its limits and delighting fans who expected only Johto. The move Splash has always confused players, since it does no damage and seems tied to water. In reality, the move's name comes from a mistranslation of the Japanese word hop, which was meant to represent Magikarp flopping on land. Because of this mistranslation, the move Splash ended up being associated with water, even when used by non-aquatic Pokemon like Hoppip. The earliest Pokemon games had planned evolutions for creatures that never made it into the final versions. For example, there was once a concept for a third stage of Raichu. Though never officially revealed in detail, small pieces of this unused idea exist in the game's data and early design notes. The decision to stop at Pikachu's evolution was likely due to balance and simplicity. In Pokemon Yellow, Pikachu refuses to evolve when given a Thunderstone. This choice was inspired by the anime, where Ash's Pikachu similarly turned down the chance to become Raichu. By embedding this detail into the game, developers tied the handheld adventure closer to the animated series, creating one of the earliest cross-media connections in the franchise. Jigglypuff's song, which puts people and Pokemon to sleep, is more than a gimmick. The tune is based on the Japanese concept of lullabies that sound cheerful yet carry a sense of melancholy. In the anime, Jigglypuff's frustration at being ignored adds an ironic layer of comedy to a creature whose talent is both powerful and lonely. In the early development of Pokemon Red and Green, battles were not originally going to use turn-based mechanics. Instead, the creators experimented with real-time encounters. However, the Game Boy hardware could not support it effectively, and the slower, more strategic turn-based system was born. This shift ended up defining the entire franchise. The Master Ball, which never fails to capture a Pokemon, has an interesting limitation in the original games. If a player tries to use it against certain glitched encounters, such as missing No, the outcome can corrupt the save file. This unintended side effect made some players cautious about experimenting with their one guaranteed capture. Meowth, one of the few Pokemon to speak human language in the anime, has a tragic backstory. His speech is the result of intense training to impress another Meowth who ultimately rejected him. This detail added a surprising emotional depth to what might have otherwise been a comic relief character, and it remains one of the saddest origin stories in the anime. The Pokemon anime was originally only supposed to last for a single year, ending once Ash reached the Pokemon League. However, due to its immense popularity, the series was extended indefinitely. This is why Ash never seemed to age throughout the decades, as the original story structure had to be stretched to fit ongoing seasons. In Red and Blue, one of the most well-known glitches is the missing No encounter. This glitch, caused by accessing invalid memory, could duplicate items in the player's inventory. While many players feared it would ruin their save files, others exploited it to gain infinite, rare candies or Master Balls. Missing No became a cultural phenomenon, symbolizing the strange quirks of early game coding. Snorlax blocking the path is one of the most memorable puzzles in the Kanto games. Interestingly, the design was meant to teach players patience, forcing them to track down the Poke Flute. By making progress dependent on a non-combat item, the developers added variety to the adventure while also giving Snorlax an iconic role in the series. The Pokemon Stadium games on Nintendo 64 were originally created to show off battles in 3D because the handheld sprites couldn't capture the scale of creatures like Charizard or Gyarados. These console titles gave fans their first look at Pokemon in a more lifelike form, paving the way for future 3D mainline entries. In Gold and Silver, Unown forms the alphabet, but the original plan was to have far more shapes, including punctuation and symbols. Technical limits cut the idea short, but even with just letters, players discovered secret messages spelled out in the ruins. The mystery surrounding Unown contributed to its eerie reputation. Ash's rival, Gary, was based loosely on Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario and Zelda. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, named Ash's Japanese counterpart Satoshi after himself, and Gary's Japanese name Shigeru after Miyamoto, symbolizing the student and mentor relationship between the two developers. This hidden nod connects Pokemon to Nintendo's larger legacy. In the early Pokemon trading card game, the card for Kadabra was surrounded by controversy. A magician named Uri Geller claimed the character was based on him, pointing to Kadabra's spoon-bending powers and its Japanese name, Youngerer, which sounded similar to his own. He sued Nintendo, which led to Kadabra not appearing in the card game for nearly 2 decades. Only in recent years did Geller apologize and allow Kadabra's return. This long absence made the psychic Pokemon's cards highly sought after by collectors, becoming one of the strangest real world legal battles tied to the franchise. In Pokemon Crystal, the ability to play as a female protagonist was introduced for the first time. Prior to that, only male characters were selectable. This addition may seem small today, but at the time it was groundbreaking, opening the door for greater inclusivity in gaming. The character, named Chris, was also notable for her bright blue hair and became a fan favorite. Her introduction marked a turning point in how Pokemon began to consider representation for its growing audience worldwide. The Pokemon anime originally intended Ash to capture a Caterpie that would evolve all the way to Butterfree and then release it shortly afterward. However, the unexpected popularity of the emotional episode where Ash let Butterfree go meant the storyline was expanded. Butterfree's departure remains one of the most heartbreaking early moments of the anime, teaching viewers that bonds with Pokemon were about love and respect, not possession. This narrative choice highlighted the franchise's ability to deliver emotional lessons beyond battles and adventures. In the games, the town of Saffron City was inspired by Tokyo's bustling cityscape, with skyscrapers and a sense of industrial sprawl. Game Freak developers admitted they wanted at least one major city that contrasted with the smaller towns and forests of Kanto. The name Saffron itself was chosen to reflect both color and spice, fitting with the series' tendency to name towns after plants. This detail gave Saffron City a grounded yet thematic presence in the Pokemon world. One of the strangest Pokemon products was a Pokemon Jet, a real airplane painted with large artwork of characters like Pikachu. These planes flew in Japan throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. Passengers could experience Pokemon-themed meals, souvenirs, and cabin announcements. The Pokemon Jet became a flying advertisement for the franchise, demonstrating just how deeply it had become part of Japanese pop culture. Today, photos of the planes are treasured reminders of that era of promotion. The character Misty, known for her fiery personality, was based on the archetype of a tomboy from Japanese storytelling. Her Japanese name, Kasumi, translates to mist or haze, tying directly into her water-type specialty. Interestingly, Misty was designed to balance Ash's impulsiveness, serving as a voice of reason while still having her own moments of immaturity. Her dynamic with Ash and Brock formed one of the most iconic trios in anime, and her influence on early fans still resonates decades later. Pokemon Gold and Silver introduced day and night cycles, something rare for handheld games at the time. This mechanic tied directly into which Pokemon appeared and when. For example, Hoot Hoot could only be found at night, while others appeared during the day. The real-time clock system gave players a stronger sense of immersion, making the Pokemon world feel alive. This addition not only expanded gameplay variety, but also encouraged children to return at different times of day, deepening their engagement. The Pokemon anime had a banned episode involving the Safari Zone, where a character was shown pointing a gun at Ash. While guns rarely appeared in the series, this particular scene was deemed too inappropriate for Western audiences. As a result, the episode never aired outside Japan, leaving international viewers confused about how Ash obtained his collection of safari balls in the anime's continuity. This censorship highlighted cultural differences in what was considered acceptable for children's programming. One of the earliest pieces of Pokemon merchandise was a line of plush toys released even before the international launch of the games. These plushies included characters like Pikachu, Poliwhirl, and Clefairy, Interestingly, Poliwhirl was once considered a mascot candidate because its spiral design was easy to print and reproduce. While Pikachu eventually won out, Poliwhirl's early presence in merchandise shows how close the franchise came to having a completely different face. The move Struggle, which activates when a Pokemon runs out of usable moves, was originally created as a failsafe so battles would never end in a stalemate. However, because Struggle damages the user as well, it added a sense of desperation to running out of power points. The existence of this move reflects the developers' careful planning, ensuring that every battle had a conclusion, no matter how dire the circumstances. It remains one of the most overlooked mechanics in the games. In Pokemon Snap, players can take photos of creatures in their natural environments, and some secrets are hidden behind interactions. For example, throwing apples at Charmander can cause multiple of them to appear around a campfire, creating a lively scene. These playful details gave Pokemon Snap a unique charm, turning it into more than just a photography game. Its lasting appeal was so strong that decades later, fans celebrated when new Pokemon Snap was released for modern systems. The Pokemon Center, now a staple in both games and merchandise, was inspired by the idea of universal healthcare. In Japan, the concept of free medical treatment is widely accepted, and Game Freak wanted to reflect a world where Pokemon were always cared for without cost. Nurse Joy's consistent presence reinforced the theme of compassion, turning Pokemon centers into safe havens for players. Their red roof design has since become iconic, representing rest, recovery, and kindness throughout the series. One little known fact is that Pokemon's cries on the Game Boy were actually compressed musical notes rather than recorded sound effects. Developers created each cry using simple tones and modulation, squeezing them into the limited memory. Despite this, fans quickly learned to recognize each creature's unique sound. Some cries, like that of Zapdos, were reused or slightly altered for multiple Pokemon, showing how resourceful the developers had to be in creating variety within such tight constraints. The anime almost gave Ash a Clefairy as his starter instead of Pikachu. Early concept art shows him traveling with the fairy type instead, but the decision was changed because Pikachu was considered more gender neutral and visually appealing. This single choice defined decades of branding and shaped Ash's identity as a trainer. Imagine the world where "I choose you, Clefairy" became the iconic catchphrase. It's a reminder of how one creative decision can change everything. In Ruby and Sapphire, a hidden mechanic determined whether a Pokemon was shiny based on a complex set of data tied to its ID and personality values. At the time, shiny odds were 1 in 8, 192, making them incredibly rare. This rarity made shinies feel like once-in-a-lifetime discoveries, often leaving players in disbelief when they stumbled upon one. The excitement of shinies became such a phenomenon that later games reduced the odds to make them more accessible. Pokemon Yellow included the ability to have Pikachu follow the player around on screen, a feature that was incredibly advanced for the Game Boy. This mechanic was later reintroduced in games like Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and more recently in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. It created a stronger bond between player and partner, making the adventure feel more personal. The origins of this idea can be traced back to developers wanting the game to mirror Ash's journey more closely. In Japan, Pokemon games were sometimes released in paired versions with slight differences to encourage trading. The concept of version exclusives was revolutionary, forcing children to interact and share in order to catch 'em all. This mechanic not only increased sales, but also fostered social connections, making Pokemon more than just a single player experience. The deliberate choice to split creatures across versions was one of the smartest design moves in gaming history. The Pokemon anime famously delayed Ash's progress, with him taking hundreds of episodes to advance. This was intentional, as producers wanted the anime to continue indefinitely without catching up to the games. Gym battles were stretched out, filler episodes were added, and journeys across regions became much longer than necessary. While frustrating to some viewers, this pacing allowed the show to last for decades, cementing Pokemon as one of the longest-running animated series ever. The character of Team Rocket was inspired by the archetype of the bumbling villain duo from Japanese comedy. Jesse and James were meant to provide comic relief while still being threatening in small doses. Their talking Meowth gave them a unique edge, separating them from typical anime villains. Despite constantly failing, their persistence and charm turned them into fan favorites, and they remain some of the most enduring characters in the franchise. In Pokemon Red and Blue, the move Hyper Beam had a unique mechanic. If it knocked out the opponent, the user didn't have to recharge. This detail made it extremely powerful in competitive play, as a well-timed Hyper Beam could sweep through a team without the usual drawback. Many early players thought it was a bug, but it was actually an intentional design choice. Later games removed this feature, standardizing the move to always require a recharge, making its red and blue version particularly memorable in competitive circles. One of the strangest Pokemon-related bans came from Saudi Arabia in the early 2000s. Authorities there claimed the Pokemon card game promoted gambling and contained symbols that resembled religious imagery. The ban received international attention, adding to the franchise's long list of cultural controversies. While Pokemon remained popular elsewhere, this incident highlighted how interpretations of children's entertainment can vary dramatically across cultures, showing how global success sometimes comes with unexpected obstacles. The Pokemon anime was once accused of having subliminal messages in the music used during battles. A specific episode involving Squirtle and Bulbasaur was said by some viewers to have hidden chanting sounds in the background. Although no concrete evidence supported the claim, the rumor spread quickly in the early days of the internet, fueled by the already massive popularity of Pokemon. This story became part of the broader wave of myths and urban legends that surrounded the franchise in its early years. The character of Brock was nearly cut from the English dub of the Pokemon anime. Early producers were concerned that American audiences wouldn't connect with him, citing his appearance and constant obsession with women. However, they eventually kept him, recognizing his role as a grounding influence and caretaker of the group. Without Brock, Ash and Misty's dynamic would have felt unbalanced. His presence in the original series ultimately became one of the most beloved aspects of the anime. A little-known fact is that Wobbuffet's blue body might not actually be its main form. Developers have hinted that the small black tail with eyes could represent its true body, with the larger blue form acting as a decoy or punching bag. This theory explains why Wobbuffet mainly counters opponents instead of attacking directly. The ambiguity was never fully clarified, but it turned the quirky Pokemon into one of the most mysterious and theorized creatures in the entire series. In Pokemon Stadium, a hidden minigame allowed players to control Lickitung in a sushi-eating contest. This unusual side activity became one of the most remembered features of the game, despite being entirely optional. For many fans, it was their first exposure to Japanese food terms like tamago or ikura. The minigame's quirky nature paired with the Pokemon's goofy design, made it a nostalgic highlight for anyone who played multiplayer with friends. The Pokemon franchise has had multiple crossover events with McDonald's, featuring toys in Happy Meals around the world. In the late 1990s, the toys included spinning tops and small figurines. In some regions, even limited edition trading cards were distributed, which are now collector's items. These partnerships demonstrated the brand's global reach and ability to adapt into everyday products, cementing Pokemon as more than just a video game or anime series, but as a cultural juggernaut. A fact often overlooked is that Missing No, the infamous glitch Pokemon, has multiple forms depending on the game cartridge's data. Its appearance and cry are determined by the programming gaps in the Pokédex entries. This made each encounter feel slightly different, as though every player had their own unique version of the glitch. For many, encountering Missing No was their first experience with the concept of bugs in video games, making it a strange yet cherished part of childhood memories. The Pokemon anime had a holiday-themed episode involving Jinx, but the design of the character caused controversy. Early versions of Jinx were drawn with pitch-black skin, leading to accusations of racial insensitivity. Nintendo later changed Jinx's design to purple to avoid further issues. This controversy remains one of the more serious examples of how character design choices can have unintended consequences, pushing the franchise to be more mindful of global audiences. Pokemon Colosseum, released for the GameCube, was the first main series spin-off to feature a darker storyline. Instead of collecting badges, players snagged corrupted shadow Pokemon from villains and purified them. This moral twist gave fans a new angle on the franchise, appealing to older audiences who had grown up with the original games. Its protagonist, Wes, remains one of the most unique characters, as he started the story by leaving an evil team and turning against them. In the early days of the Pokemon anime, censorship affected not only guns, but also references to Japanese culture. For example, rice balls were often changed to donuts in the English dub. This led to some humorous situations where characters clearly held rice balls, but the dialogue insisted they were eating jelly-filled donuts. This odd translation choice became a long-running joke among fans, remembered as one of the quirkiest examples of localization. One interesting detail in Gold and Silver is that trainers could call the player on their Pokégear to rematch or share information. This feature added depth to the NPCs, making them feel more like friends instead of random battles. Some trainers even shared rare tips, like where swarms of Pokemon might appear. While sometimes annoying when calls interrupted, the feature was groundbreaking in creating a living world where relationships with trainers extended beyond single encounters. The Pokemon Company once collaborated with the Japanese Space Agency to send a Pikachu and Cosmog-themed satellite into orbit. Though small and largely symbolic, the mission demonstrated Pokemon's cultural significance, reaching beyond games and media into actual space exploration. Fans marveled at the idea of Pokemon being associated with the cosmos, reinforcing the theme that the franchise could inspire imagination, not only on Earth, but beyond it as well. A strange bit of trivia is that Pokemon cries in the anime are often voiced by human actors rather than generated electronically. For example, Pikachu's iconic voice is performed by Ikue Otani, who has sustained the role for decades. These performances give the creatures more personality than a simple sound effect could, making them feel alive. The consistency of voices across hundreds of episodes and movies has helped cement these characters in pop culture. Pokemon Red and Blue contained a hidden glitch involving the move Substitute. If a Pokemon fainted while using Substitute in certain circumstances, the game could register strange effects, like the Substitute doll remaining on screen or Pokemon being stuck in battle. While harmless, these oddities fascinated early players who loved experimenting with game-breaking mechanics. It reflected how the limitations of the Game Boy hardware often produced quirky, unintentional surprises. The Pokemon anime almost replaced Team Rocket with another villainous group after the first season. Producers considered introducing new recurring antagonists to keep the show fresh. However, Jesse, James, and Meowth were so beloved by fans that they became permanent fixtures instead. Their comic failures and surprising depth made them too important to remove, proving that sometimes fan response can shape the direction of long-running media more than original plans. In Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, developers introduced double battles, where two Pokemon fight on each side. This added a new layer of strategy, as players had to consider moves that targeted multiple opponents or supported allies. Interestingly, the idea for double battles was inspired by fan feedback, where players wished they could recreate the multi-Pokemon fights seen in the anime. This mechanic later became a staple of competitive play, showing how fan desires directly influenced game design. The Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town was one of the first times the series dealt with themes of death. The eerie setting, combined with unsettling music, gave the location an infamous reputation. Some players found the atmosphere so disturbing that rumors began circulating about hidden dangers, like the Lavender Town Syndrome creepypasta. While entirely fictional, these stories amplified the tower's unsettling reputation, cementing it as one of the most memorable and haunting locations in gaming history. In the Japanese version of Pokemon Red and Green, the gym leader Erica made a reference to her perfume shop, which was later toned down in international versions. In Japan, her character was tied closely to femininity and elegance, while the English adaptations softened these traits. The localization shift subtly changed her personality, making her less tied to cultural stereotypes. This demonstrates how translation decisions can reshape characters, altering how different audiences perceive them. In Pokemon Yellow, the player's Pikachu refused to evolve no matter how many Thunderstones were offered. This mirrored Ash's companion in the anime, who resisted evolution to remain true to itself. It was one of the earliest examples of the game's borrowing traits directly from the anime, showing just how closely the two mediums became intertwined. This detail made Pikachu stand out even more as a mascot, reminding players that its charm wasn't just in strength, but in its individuality. Pokemon Snap, released for the Nintendo 64, was originally pitched as a photography game unrelated to the franchise. Developers at HAL Laboratory created a concept where players explored an island, taking photos of wildlife. When Nintendo realized it could be adapted into a Pokemon title, the project instantly gained more appeal. This rebranding not only saved the game from obscurity, but also created one of the most beloved spin-offs in the series. A little-known fact about Ditto is that it shares the same cry sound as Mew in the original Game Boy games. Many fans speculated this was intentional, fueling theories that Ditto was a failed attempt at cloning Mew. Both Pokemon are pink, capable of learning Transform, and have similar base stats. While the theory has never been confirmed officially, the eerie similarities continue to make Ditto one of the most mysterious Pokemon in the franchise. The Safari Zone in Red and Blue was unlike any other area in the game. Instead of battling, players had to throw bait, rocks, and safari balls in hopes of catching rare creatures. This unique design was inspired by real-world safari parks, where observation replaced combat. The area introduced fan-favorite species and challenged players to think differently about catching. Its distinct mechanics made it unforgettable, even if it frustrated those who lost rare encounters. In the Pokemon anime, James from Team Rocket once disguised himself in a bikini with inflatable breasts during a beauty contest episode. This scene caused significant controversy, leading to the episode being banned outside of Japan. It remains one of the most infamous examples of censorship in the series' history. While never aired internationally, the episode became legendary among fans, often discussed as one of the strangest choices ever made in the anime's early run. Pokemon Crystal was the first game to allow players to choose a female protagonist. This was a groundbreaking step in the series, giving players more representation. The character, Chris, opened the door for future customization, eventually leading to a more inclusive experience where players could decide how they wanted to be seen in the Pokemon world. At the time, this addition felt revolutionary, and it remains a major milestone in gaming history. The Pokemon anime introduced the idea of Pokemon having unique personalities much earlier than the games did. Ash's Charizard, for example, famously disobeyed him for a large portion of the series. This storytelling choice added emotional weight to battles, as the relationship between trainer and Pokemon became as important as the fight itself. Eventually, this dynamic inspired later games to add features where Pokemon could show affection or disobedience based on their bond with the trainer. Pokemon Gold and Silver originally included 100 more Pokemon designs than what appeared in the final release. Early beta builds revealed unused creatures, some of which later inspired designs in future generations. These prototypes were shown in a leaked demo years later, fascinating fans who enjoyed analyzing how concepts evolved over time. The existence of these unused designs demonstrated that the creative process often leaves behind forgotten ideas, even in beloved franchises. In the anime, Meowth's ability to speak human language has never been replicated by another Pokemon. His backstory revealed that he taught himself to speak and walk upright to impress a female Meowth, only to be rejected. This tragic motivation made him one of the most complex and sympathetic characters in the series. It highlighted how the anime sometimes gave surprising depth to characters often portrayed as comedic relief. Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo 64 had an elaborate transfer system that allowed players to connect their Game Boy cartridges. With the transfer pack, players could bring their teams to life in 3D battles. At the time, seeing your carefully trained party animated on a home console was groundbreaking. This feature bridged handheld and console gaming, showing how innovative connectivity could make the Pokemon world feel more immersive. The music of Lavender Town became infamous due to a creepy urban legend. Stories spread online claiming that the original Japanese version's high-pitched tones caused dizziness, headaches, and even worse effects in children. While these claims were exaggerated and untrue, the eerie theme left a lasting impression. It became one of the most iconic and unsettling tracks in gaming history, perfectly fitting the atmosphere of the haunted tower it accompanied. In Ruby and Sapphire, weather effects were introduced for the first time. Rain, sun, and sandstorms not only changed the visuals, but also influenced battles. This addition created deeper strategy, as players had to adapt their teams to different conditions. Later, the idea expanded to include abilities and moves that could alter weather, making it a central part of competitive play. This small detail became one of the most influential mechanics in the franchise. A rare piece of trivia about Ash's Pikachu is that it once defeated a Latios in battle during the Sinnoh League finals. This victory was controversial among fans, as many felt it exaggerated Pikachu's strength compared to legendary creatures. Regardless, the moment stood as a testament to Pikachu's growth throughout the series. It also reinforced the idea that bond and determination could sometimes overcome sheer power in the Pokemon universe. The Pokemon trading card game once released a unique card made entirely of plastic, known as the Pokemon E-cards. They could be scanned with the e-reader accessory for the Game Boy Advance to unlock mini-games or data. While the accessory never caught on worldwide, it showcased Nintendo's willingness to experiment with blending physical and digital play. Today, these cards are rare collector's items, treasured for their unusual design and limited functionality. In the anime, Ash's Butterfree was released to join a group of wild Butterfree during a migration event. This emotional episode became one of the most iconic goodbyes in the series. Many children watching felt genuine sadness, as it was one of the first times a main character had to part ways with a beloved companion. The episode remains a defining moment, often cited as one of the most touching stories in the franchise. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire introduced secret bases, allowing players to decorate small hideouts with items collected throughout the game. These personalized spaces were a fan favorite feature, encouraging creativity and social interaction. Players could even share their bases with friends via link cables. The idea of customizing your own corner of the world made the games feel more personal, adding a sense of ownership and charm that players still fondly remember. In the earliest Pokemon designs, many creatures looked more animal-like than their final versions. Early sketches revealed designs that were bulkier, rougher, and sometimes scarier than what appeared in the games. These changes were made to appeal to a younger audience, softening features to look more approachable. Looking back at these prototypes reveals a fascinating glimpse into how Pokemon could have looked if different design decisions had been made. The Pokemon anime once had an episode where Porygon was featured, but it was banned after causing seizures in hundreds of viewers. The flashing red and blue lights triggered a medical emergency in Japan, leading to hospitalizations. Since then, Porygon has rarely appeared in the anime, despite not being responsible for the flashing effect. This incident is one of the most infamous in television history, shaping how animation studios handle flashing imagery. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green introduced the wireless adapter for the Game Boy Advance, allowing players to trade and battle without link cables. This was a major step toward modern connectivity in gaming. The feature paved the way for Wi-Fi trading in later generations, making Pokemon feel more social and connected than ever. While the adapter itself was bulky and limited, it marked the beginning of a new era for the series. In Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, a strange glitch known as the Surf on Land bug allowed players to ride across solid ground as if it were water. This error happened under specific conditions, and once triggered, players could surf into unusual areas. Some even managed to reach places that weren't normally accessible, causing wild encounters in bizarre spots. Glitches like this became legendary in fan communities, showing how even polished games sometimes contained cracks that offered glimpses into unintended worlds. The Pokemon anime once revealed that Brock's Onix grew dramatically over the course of the series, seemingly larger than its original depiction in the games. The inconsistent scaling of Pokemon between the anime and games became a recurring issue. Sometimes Pokemon appeared massive and intimidating, while at other times they looked small enough to fit into a building. These inconsistencies fascinated fans, highlighting how animation sometimes prioritized dramatic effect over accuracy. One of the rarest events in the Pokemon franchise with the release of Mew through a special distribution in Japan. Players had to physically mail their cartridges to Nintendo, where the company would transfer the mythical creature onto their save file before sending it back. This unusual system made the event highly memorable, and receiving a cartridge back with Mew inside was a treasure for players lucky enough to participate. The early Pokemon manga series, known as Pokemon Adventures, was far darker than the anime. Characters faced life-threatening situations, and battles often depicted more intense consequences. Some storylines even hinted at death and moral dilemmas, creating a mature tone rarely seen in other adaptations. This contrast showed how the franchise could be interpreted in multiple ways, from lighthearted children's shows to deeper narratives exploring the bonds between humans and Pokemon. In the Hoenn region games, Feebas was notoriously difficult to find, appearing only on 6 random water tiles in a large river. To make it worse, those 6 tiles changed if the game's trend phrase was altered in Dewford Town. This made catching Feebas one of the most frustrating challenges for players. Eventually, many guides were written just to help players track down this elusive fish, cementing its reputation as one of the hardest Pokemon to obtain legitimately. The Pokemon anime originally planned for Ash to capture a Clefairy as his partner instead of Pikachu. Early drafts and promotional material even suggested this direction. However, Pikachu was chosen instead due to its neutral appeal to both boys and girls, as well as its cuter, more marketable design. This single decision changed the course of the franchise, making Pikachu one of the most recognizable mascots in the world. Pokemon Colosseum on the GameCube was the first mainline-style game to be released on a home console. Unlike traditional titles, it featured a darker storyline involving snagging and purifying shadow Pokemon. Its more mature tone stood out, exploring themes of corruption and redemption. While not as commercially successful as handheld entries, it earned a cult following, showing that Pokemon stories could thrive in different atmospheres beyond the cheerful tone of the main series. In Pokemon Red and Blue, Missing No became one of the most infamous glitches in gaming history. Encountered by performing a series of steps involving the Old Man in Viridian City, this strange, blocky creature allowed players to duplicate items like rare candies. While not officially recognized, Missing No became a cultural icon, sparking playground rumors and myths. It remains a reminder of how glitches can sometimes enhance a game's legacy rather than harm it. The Pokemon trading card game once produced an extremely rare card called Pre-Release Raichu. This card was supposedly printed by mistake, stamped with the word pre-release before official distribution. Very few copies were confirmed to exist, and debates over their authenticity raged for years. Today, the card is considered one of the most mysterious and valuable misprints in the franchise, representing how even production errors can become prized treasures among collectors. In Pokemon Gold and Silver, trainers could call the player on the Pokégear. These calls often included reminders about rematches, updates on swarms of rare Pokemon, or even casual chatter. While some players found the frequent interruptions annoying, the feature added a sense of life to the world. It felt like trainers existed beyond static battles, making the region feel dynamic and interactive in a way earlier games couldn't achieve. The Pokemon anime featured an unusual episode where Ash and Pikachu swapped personalities with each other due to a mischievous ghost-type Pokemon. This comedic scenario gave viewers a rare chance to see Pikachu acting like a human and Ash struggling to adapt to being in a Pokemon's body. While the episode was played for laughs, it also highlighted the deep bond between the two characters, as they had to rely on each other even more than usual. One of the rarest mechanics in the franchise appeared in Pokemon Crystal with the introduction of the Battle Tower. This was the first attempt at post-game competitive play, allowing trainers to test their skills in structured battles. While basic by modern standards, the concept was revolutionary at the time, paving the way for the Battle Frontier, Battle Subway, and eventually online competitions. It was the seed of what would grow into an entire competitive community. In Pokemon Emerald, players could encounter a unique trainer named Scott, who encouraged them to explore the battle frontier. This marked the first time the series created a recurring character dedicated to guiding the player through advanced battle facilities. Scott acted almost like a mentor, and his inclusion tied the post-game challenges together. His role emphasized that Pokemon wasn't just about the main story, but also about mastering advanced mechanics. The first Pokemon film, released in 1998, came with an unusual promotion: exclusive trading cards given to theatergoers. These included cards like Ancient Mew, which featured a mysterious script rather than standard text. Fans cherished these collectibles, and they became highly sought after over time. The film itself left a lasting emotional impact, but for many, the physical cards handed out at the door remain their most vivid memory. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire introduced double battles, where two Pokemon could fight alongside each other at once. This was a major innovation, adding new layers of strategy to the game. Players had to think about move interactions, such as how Earthquake could hit both opponents, but also a partner. The format became so popular that it later became the standard in official tournaments, reshaping the competitive landscape forever. In the Pokemon anime, Ash once encountered a wild haunter who helped him during his gym battle against Sabrina. This ghost Pokemon's playful antics lightened the tone of an otherwise dark storyline. Haunter even caused Sabrina to laugh, breaking her cold and unsettling demeanor. The episode became memorable not just for the battle, but for how humor and heart could resolve conflicts as much as strength. The earliest Japanese Pokemon merchandise included food items like curry, ramen, and even popsicles shaped like Pikachu. These were designed to capitalize on the craze sweeping Japan during the late 1990s. Some of these items are now collector's treasures, with unopened packages selling for high prices. It demonstrates how Pokemon was never just about games and shows, but about building a cultural phenomenon that touched nearly every aspect of daily life. In Pokemon Black and White, the storyline emphasized moral ambiguity by questioning whether keeping Pokemon in Pokeballs was ethical. The villainous team, Plasma, claimed to be liberating Pokemon from human control. While their true motives were more sinister, the theme introduced complex questions about the relationship between humans and Pokemon. It was one of the first times the series directly addressed philosophical ideas, making the Unova story stand out among other generations. Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver included a step counter accessory called the Pokewalker. This pedometer allowed players to transfer a Pokemon from their game and carry it in the real world. Walking generated steps that could be used to earn experience, find items, or even catch wild Pokemon. The device encouraged physical activity while tying it to gameplay. It became an early example of blending real-world health with gaming, predating mobile apps like Pokemon Go. In Pokemon X and Y, the player was introduced to the concept of mega evolution, but the lore surrounding it was unusually mysterious. It was said that mega evolution could only happen when there was a strong bond between a trainer and their partner, but also required a special stone. The idea of this transformation raised questions about whether it was natural or artificial. The games hinted at an ancient war that might have led to the creation of this phenomenon, connecting competitive gameplay with a deeper narrative about the cost of power. During the early development of Pokemon Red and Green, programmers struggled to fit all of the game's data onto the limited Game Boy cartridges. To make everything work, they had to compress sprites and reuse bits of code creatively. Some glitches, like missing no, were byproducts of this process. The dedication of the developers to squeeze so much into such small memory became part of the charm, as the limitations pushed them to be innovative in ways that later generations wouldn't need to be. The Pokemon anime once showed that James from Team Rocket owned a rare coughing as a child. This contradicted his otherwise comedic, bumbling personality, adding a layer of depth to his backstory. Later episodes revealed more about his wealthy but stifling upbringing, showing why he chose a life of adventure rather than privilege. Small moments like these enriched the characters, giving them personal histories that made them feel more human than simple antagonists. Pokemon Yellow was one of the first games to directly tie into the anime, allowing players to have a starter Pikachu that followed them on the overworld. While the game was largely based on Red and Blue, this addition made it feel fresh. Pikachu's refusal to evolve into Raichu was even mirrored in the game's mechanics, symbolizing the bond between Ash and his partner. It was a clever way to bridge the two mediums, strengthening the brand's connection across games and television. The Safari Zone in the original Kanto games was one of the most unusual areas players encountered. Instead of battling Pokemon normally, players were restricted to Safari Balls and items like bait or rocks. This mechanic frustrated many, but also added unpredictability. Pokemon could flee at any moment, making rare catches even more thrilling. The Safari Zone set the stage for future experimental areas in later generations, proving the series could push beyond traditional battle systems. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, regional forms were introduced for the first time. Known as Alolan forms, these were new versions of existing Pokemon adapted to the environment of the islands. For example, Vulpix became an ice type, reflecting the snowy mountains of Alola. This concept not only refreshed old designs, but also tied Pokemon more closely to their habitats, reinforcing the idea that the world of Pokemon was diverse and ever-changing, much like ecosystems in the real world. The Pokemon anime once depicted an unusual crossover with the real world during a scene where a character used a modern laptop. This was striking because most of the technology in the show felt slightly futuristic or fantastical. The sudden appearance of something so ordinary blurred the lines between reality and the Pokemon universe. Fans often debate how much of the world is meant to parallel ours, with hints like these adding to the mystery. Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo 64 was groundbreaking for its time, allowing players to see their creatures in full 3D for the first time. Each Pokemon had unique animations, attack effects, and fainting sequences, making battles feel alive in a way that the pixelated handheld versions couldn't. While the game lacked a traditional adventure mode, it let players connect their cartridges and see their teams rendered like never before. For many fans, it was their first glimpse of Pokemon in 3 dimensions. In the Hoenn games, one of the most bizarre details was the Reggie puzzle, which required players to translate Braille inscriptions. This unusual choice confused many younger players, as Braille wasn't something they were familiar with. Guides and magazines at the time often had to explain what to do, but for those who solved it, unlocking the legendary golems felt like a rewarding accomplishment. It was one of the few times a game mechanic encouraged learning something from the real world. The Pokemon trading card game once experimented with creating cards that could only be used in Japan. For example, some promotional cards tied to specific events or contests never left the country. This created a sense of exclusivity and mystery, as fans outside of Japan could only see scans in magazines. The rarity of these cards made them incredibly valuable among collectors, and even today, they represent some of the most sought-after items in the hobby. Pokemon Snap, a spin-off on the Nintendo 64, allowed players to photograph Pokemon in their natural habitats. This was a completely different experience from battling, focusing instead on observation and creativity. The game even encouraged experimentation, as players could throw apples or pester balls to lure Pokemon into unique poses. While simple in concept, the game left a lasting impression, showing that the franchise could succeed outside of traditional gameplay while still capturing its sense of wonder. One of the most obscure details in the Pokemon world is that early game manuals described Kadabra as being a human who transformed into a Pokemon after psychic powers grew uncontrollable. This eerie backstory added a darker layer to its design, raising questions about the blurred line between people and Pokemon. Later versions of the lore softened this, but the original text remains one of the most unusual and unsettling origins ever written for a creature in the franchise. In the Johto games, players were able to participate in the bug-catching contest. This event limited them to one chance at capturing the best bug-type Pokemon within a specific time frame. Scoring was based not only on the species, but also on the level and health of the Pokemon caught. This system made the contest feel competitive and rewarding. It was a unique side activity that gave bug types, often overlooked, a chance to shine in the spotlight. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon introduced the concept of playing as a Pokemon rather than a trainer. The storylines were surprisingly emotional, exploring themes of identity, friendship, and sacrifice. Many players were caught off guard by how touching the games could be, with endings that left lasting impressions. By shifting the perspective, the spin-off series provided a new way to connect with the creatures, not as companions, but as protagonists in their own right. The Pokemon anime featured an infamous banned episode involving the Pokemon Porygon. During this episode, a flashing sequence triggered seizures in hundreds of viewers, leading to hospitalizations. As a result, the episode was pulled from rotation and never aired again. This incident changed broadcasting standards in Japan, with stricter guidelines introduced to prevent similar occurrences. Porygon itself was unfairly blamed and has rarely appeared in the anime since, despite not being the cause of the issue. In Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, the underground feature allowed players to dig for fossils, treasures, and spheres. This side activity was addictively fun, letting players carve out tunnels while risking cave-ins. Multiplayer elements allowed friends to visit each other's bases and hunt together, making the underground a social experience. It was a creative way to extend the game's longevity, blending exploration, collection, and cooperation all in one. The Pokemon anime once portrayed Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket, in a surprisingly sympathetic light. Certain episodes hinted at his affection for his Persian, showing a softer side to the otherwise ruthless boss. This complexity made him feel less like a cartoon villain and more like a layered character. By giving even antagonists moments of humanity, the series enriched its storytelling, keeping audiences invested in more than just battles. In Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, the remakes of the original games, players could explore the Sevii Islands. These new locations expanded the Kanto region with fresh challenges, new characters, and rare Pokemon. The islands offered a sense of discovery, showing that even familiar regions could be expanded in meaningful ways. This set the precedent for future remakes to not just retell the same story, but to build upon it with new content. One of the strangest facts in the series comes from the original Pokédex entry for Drifloon, which claims it tries to grab the hands of children and drag them away. This dark description stood out in contrast to the otherwise cheerful nature of the games. Over time, many ghost-type entries developed similarly unsettling lore, making them some of the creepiest creatures in the franchise. It shows how the Pokédex often hides eerie details beneath its playful exterior. One of the earliest inspirations for Pokémon was the creator Satoshi Tajiri's childhood love of collecting insects. He wanted to capture the same feeling of going outside, exploring, and discovering tiny creatures in hidden places. The trading element was also inspired by his memory of kids swapping bugs and cards at school. By blending these simple joys with technology, he built a universe where exploration and collection became the foundation. This nostalgic idea explains why Pokemon always emphasizes adventure over simple competition. In Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, weather effects were introduced into battles for the first time. Rain, sun, sandstorms, and hail not only changed the atmosphere of the fight, but also influenced gameplay. Strategies began to revolve around building teams that could take advantage of these conditions. The addition of weather brought dynamic elements into battles, making them feel less predictable and more strategic. It also tied into Hoenn's theme of nature and balance, where the land, sea, and sky constantly interacted. The Pokemon anime once portrayed Brock leaving the group temporarily, being replaced by Tracy as Ash's companion. The change was initially made because producers feared that Brock's design might be interpreted negatively in Western audiences. However, fans quickly missed his humor and caretaker role. Tracy didn't resonate the same way, and Brock eventually returned, becoming a permanent figure again. This moment highlighted how audience feedback shaped the long-term direction of the series. In the original games, there was an unused Pokemon known as Gorochu, which was planned as an evolution of Raichu. It was said to have horns and a more powerful appearance, but it was cut due to balance issues and cartridge limitations. The idea has fascinated fans for years, as it suggests Pikachu's line was almost a three-stage evolution. This missing link became one of the most famous pieces of Pokemon trivia, showing how close the franchise came to altering one of its mascots. Pokemon Colosseum, released on the GameCube, was one of the first spin-offs to break away from the happy-go-lucky tone of the main games. Its story involved stealing corrupted Pokemon from villains and purifying them. The darker setting, complete with shadowy towns and morally gray characters, stood out compared to the usual bright worlds. This shift showed that Pokemon could explore more mature themes while still appealing to fans of all ages. In the anime, Meowth from Team Rocket is unique because he learned to speak human language. His backstory revealed he did this to impress a female Meowth, though his efforts ultimately failed. The tragedy of his tale made him more than comic relief, adding depth to his character. His ability to talk also allowed him to serve as both translator and moral compass, bridging the gap between humans and Pokémon in a way no other character could. The concept of shinies was first introduced in Gold and Silver, though the red Gyarados at the Lake of Rage was designed to ensure every player encountered one. This served as both a tutorial and a dramatic moment, making shiny Pokémon more than just rare finds. Catching one became a badge of honor for players, and the phenomenon spread into every generation. Today, shiny hunting is a major subculture in the fandom, with players dedicating hours to finding these alternate colored treasures. In Pokemon lore, it's said that Clefairy once came from the moon. This connection was reinforced by Mount Moon, where players could first encounter it, as well as the Moonstone item used to evolve it. The otherworldly association tied into myths and legends about extraterrestrial beings, making it one of the more mystical creatures. Over time, this theme of cosmic origins has been revisited in other designs, reinforcing the idea that Pokemon don't just belong to earthly environments. The Pokemon Company has always experimented with unusual merchandise. In the late 1990s, Japan released official Pokemon-themed airplanes through a partnership with All Nippon Airways. These colorful planes were decorated with characters on the exterior and even had themed meals and merchandise on board. For fans, flying on one of these planes was like stepping into the Pokemon world. It demonstrated the franchise's ability to extend far beyond games, reaching into unexpected parts of everyday life. In the Sinnoh games, Rotom had one of the strangest methods of being discovered. Players had to visit the old chateau, a haunted mansion where the atmosphere alone was unsettling. At night, Rotom would appear from a television, blending supernatural elements with technology. This eerie mix fit perfectly with Sinnoh's balance of ancient myths and modern advancements. The encounter remains one of the most memorable ghostly moments in the series. The anime once had a storyline where Ash released his Butterfree so it could migrate with others and find a mate. This emotional moment was one of the first times viewers saw that trainers sometimes had to let go of their companions. It emphasized the bond between humans and Pokemon wasn't just about ownership, but about respect and love. Many fans still cite this as one of the saddest and most impactful episodes in the series. The Pokemon manga series, particularly Pokemon Adventures, often took a darker approach than the anime. Characters faced real danger, battles could be brutal, and stakes felt higher. Unlike the lighthearted show, the manga depicted a world where the consequences of battling could be intense. Despite being lesser known outside of Japan, it has been praised for staying closer to the tone of the games and giving fans a more mature alternative to the anime's cheerful tone. In the Kalos games, Lumio's city was designed to resemble Paris, complete with a giant tower modeled after the Eiffel Tower. The scale of the city was impressive, with wide streets, cafes, and shops. However, its design also pushed the limits of the 3DS hardware, leading to frame drops and occasional crashes. Still, it gave players one of the most immersive urban environments in the series, blending cultural inspiration with the charm of Pokemon. The early concept art of Pokemon showed creatures that looked far more dinosaur-like than the final designs. These prototypes reflected the influence of kaiju movies and Japanese monster culture. Over time, the designs softened into the cuter, more approachable forms we know today, but hints of their primal origins remain in certain species. This evolution of art style helped broaden the appeal, making the creatures loved by both children and adults. In Pokemon lore, some ghost types are believed to be reincarnations of humans or spirits trapped between worlds. The most chilling example is Yamask, which is said to carry a mask that represents its former human face. It's even implied that the Pokemon remembers its past life, which is unusually dark compared to other entries. These ghostly stories added a layer of creepiness that contrasted with the otherwise colorful and playful world. The Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games often included hidden mechanics that rewarded exploration. For example, certain dungeons could only be unlocked after completing obscure tasks like fainting in specific places or carrying unusual items. This level of detail encouraged players to experiment and replay, making discoveries feel personal. These mechanics reflected the core theme of the spin-off series, that curiosity and perseverance lead to adventure. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, the Ultra Beasts stood out as one of the strangest groups of creatures introduced. Unlike most Pokemon, they were portrayed as alien invaders from another dimension. Their unusual designs and unsettling behavior made them feel fundamentally different from other species. This narrative twist added mystery and danger, suggesting that the world of Pokemon is far larger and more complex than previously thought. The Pokemon anime once made a cultural impact in the US when the infamous Pokemon Shock incident led news outlets to scrutinize the franchise. Despite the controversy, it only increased Pokemon's popularity as parents and children alike became more curious. This strange moment turned a negative event into a global talking point, showing how resilient the brand was. Instead of fading, Pokemon grew stronger and became even more entrenched in pop culture. Pokemon Go, released in 2016, was more than just a game, it was a cultural event. It encouraged people to leave their homes, explore real-world locations, and interact with others. Parks and landmarks were filled with players of all ages, creating an unprecedented social phenomenon. For a brief period, it felt like the entire world was united in chasing Pokemon. The experience highlighted how technology could blend with reality to create something magical. The idea of Pokemon fusions has fascinated fans since the early days. While official games never fully embraced it, Pokemon like Slowbro and Magneton suggested creatures could merge into something new. Fans took the idea further, creating entire communities dedicated to making their own fusion designs. This fascination shows how much players enjoy experimenting with combinations, imagining endless possibilities beyond what exists in the games. In the anime, James from Team Rocket has one of the most unusual backstories. He came from a wealthy family but abandoned that life to live freely. His struggle with expectations and his rejection of privilege added surprising depth to a comedic character. This contrast between silliness and seriousness is part of why Team Rocket has remained so memorable across decades. The Unknown from Johto were designed as alphabet-inspired mysteries. Their shapes resembled letters, hinting at secrets hidden within ruins. However, their actual role in the games remained vague, adding to their mystique. Fans speculated about deeper meanings, believing they might be tied to the origins of language itself in the Pokemon world. Their obscurity turned them into one of the franchise's most enigmatic creations. The Pokemon Snap game for the Nintendo 64 was groundbreaking in how it shifted focus. Instead of battling, players photographed Pokemon in their natural environments. This peaceful gameplay emphasized observation and discovery. Its popularity proved that the franchise could thrive in genres far from traditional RPG mechanics, paving the way for other experimental spin offs. Ash's Pikachu once defeated a legendary opponent in the anime, shocking both fans and critics. While many argued it bent the rules of strength, it symbolized the importance of heart and determination in the series. This highlighted the core theme of Pokemon, that bonds often matter more than raw power. The moment became one of the most debated yet iconic victories in anime history. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl introduced online trading, revolutionizing how players interacted. For the first time, fans could trade globally without physical connections. This created a massive worldwide community, connecting trainers across continents. It also gave rise to the Global Trade Station, where rare and unusual trades fascinated players. The shift to online features marked a turning point in making Pokemon truly global in scope. The character N, introduced in Pokemon Black and White, stood out as one of the most morally complex figures. He believed Pokemon should be liberated from humans, arguing they were exploited. His ideals, while extreme, challenged players to consider the ethics of training. The philosophical depth of his character surprised many, showing the franchise could tell more thoughtful and mature stories. The Pokemon TCG trading card game once had cards that were banned not because of power, but because of cultural sensitivities. Some artwork and symbols unintentionally resembled real-world religious imagery, leading to recalls and redesigns. This rare intersection of art and culture highlighted how Pokemon's global reach required sensitivity across different regions. It also turned those early cards into highly sought-after collectibles. In the early anime, Jigglypuff's gag of singing characters to sleep became one of its trademarks. Its habit of drawing on their faces after being ignored added comedic charm. Despite its simplicity, this running joke became iconic, capturing how even side characters could leave a lasting impact. It demonstrated how humor and personality helped the anime resonate beyond just action scenes. Finally, one of the most obscure facts is that Pokemon was originally almost canceled during development. Game Freak faced extreme financial difficulties, and many employees worked long hours without guarantee of success. The project was seen as risky, and without Nintendo's eventual backing, it might never have been released. The fact that Pokemon not only survived but went on to become one of the biggest franchises in history is itself one of the greatest stories in gaming. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through 151 obscure Pokemon facts. From mysteries hidden in the games to unforgettable moments in the anime, these little details remind us why the world of Pokemon continues to capture imaginations. As you drift off to sleep, may your dreams be filled with adventure, discovery, and the wonder of a world where anything feels possible.